Which team in the National League East will feature the best designated hitter this season? I'll discuss that on this edition of Locked On Mets.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're watching Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. If you want to find any of my work, follow me on Twitter at Finkelstein Ryan. You can also find some of my writing at justbaseball.com, where I work as the managing editor, where I actually just wrote an article about the Universal DH, talking about which NL teams can most take advantage of this new position this season. The Mets were listed, as were the Marlins, but as honorable mentions. The one team that I really focused on in that article was the Phillies. And the Phillies are the clear answer here. I don't want to beat around the bush. They will have the best DH this season. They signed two of them, Nick Castellanos and Kyle Schwarber. It added 66 home runs into their lineup from last season, both of those guys hitting over 30 bombs. Also, you had 17 players in baseball last year with at least 450 plate appearances that ended the season with a WRC plus over 140. Again, WRC plus is weighted runs created plus, measuring hitters based on a league average of 100. So a 140 WRC plus is 40% better than your league average hitter. Those two guys, Schwarber and Castellanos, are some of the best hitters in the game. That gives the Phillies the best possible option in this division, really the two best options to be a primary DH. And I'm really interested in how the Phillies will go about it, because really they need like 3 DH spots for this team to be even halfway competent defensively. You don't want Castellanos playing defense. You don't want Schwarber playing defense. But if both of them are going to be in their lineup, one of them is going to have to be in the outfield. Also, this is a team that already had Alec Boehm, already had Rhys Hoskins, a couple of subpar defensive players that could have been DHs. So where does that put the Phillies? It's going to be really interesting to see how they line everything up. Also, Bryson Stott appears to be heading towards the opening day roster, a prospect that is likely to take over at third base. That leaves Boehm outside of the lineup, and that also could set the stage for the lineup I'm dying to see. I'm dying to see it. I know it's going to happen at some point. It's going to be glorious. Joe Girardi one day is going to be looking for a spark. Trying to find a way to get Bohm's bat in the lineup. He's got Stott playing third, Gregorius at short, Gene Segura at second, Hoskins at first. Looking in the outfielding as well. Bryce Harper technically can play some center field. Nick Castellanos technically can play right. Schwarber can play left. Well, let's try it. And they're going to put those 3 guys in the outfield together at one time, and you will never see more doubles hit in the game when you have those 3 guys out there. No one is getting to anything in the gaps. So I can see that lineup at some point. Now, you look at that scenario with Boehm as the DH and those 3 guys out in the outfield, and Hoskins and Segura and even Gregorius, and that team out there with Stott and Real Muto. That would be a absolutely ridiculously loaded lineup 1-9. It's just a team that can't field their position. So that's the Phillies this year. They're the biggest boomer bust team in this division, but that also is why they have the best DH possible. The second best DH in this division is the guy that has made a career out of it, at least in his mid to late 30s, going into his 40s. And of course, I'm talking about Nelson Cruz. Nelson Cruz is a surprising signing for the Nationals, gives Juan Soto some legitimate protection in that lineup. That's great for him. It's good for the fans out in Washington. I don't think it does much to move the Nationals beyond being a 65 to 70 win team, but it gives them a little bit of punch. And last season, Nelson Cruz with the Twins was an all-star, hit 294, 370 on base, 537 slugging, 19 home runs, and 50 RBIs in 85 games. They traded to Tampa, and he really struggled, hitting just 226 with a 283 on base, 442 slugging. Did hit 13 home runs in 55 games, but really what happened for Cruz last year, I don't think it was this steep decline due to his age, I think hitting in Tropicana Park is just really difficult. And that is proved out when you look at the stats there. Really drastic home road splits for Cruz. He hit 211 with a 270 on base, 333 slugging in his 25 games played at Tropicana Field. Had 3 home runs during that span. I think you get him out of there. He is going to be a great DH for the Nationals this season. This leaves us with the other 3 teams in this division: the Mets, the Braves, the Marlins. Who will have the best DH of the bunch? I might lean Mets here, and I'll give you the options. For the Braves, it appears like Marcell Ozuna will eventually take that role. Also, early in the season, you could see really what will be the best DH maybe in late April or May in this division, which is Ronald Acuna Jr. As he works his way back from that knee injury, he'll likely get a lot of time at DH to start the season. So in the early goings, the Braves will have a really good option, but eventually I would imagine Marcell Ozuna will become their DH, and that's going to be another player where you just don't know what you're going to get. In 2020, he was unbelievable, hit 338, 431 on base, 636 slugging, 18 home runs in 60 games with a 178 WRC plus. But last year, 213 average, 288 on base, 356 slugging with 7 home runs and a 73 WRC plus in 48 games. Then he had the domestic violence suspension. You look at his career, and I would just project out Ozuna to be closer to his career numbers than anything else. And for his career, a 273 hitter, 333 on base, 461 slugging, a 115 WRC plus. I don't love Ozuna, not only for who he is, but as a player, I really don't know what he's going to give the Braves this season. And honestly, it has me thinking maybe the Braves had the worst DH situation in this division. Although that is giving Garrett Cooper maybe a little more credit than I should. I just think Cooper is a player that has showed a lot of promise the last 2 years. A 133 WRC plus in 2020 and 2021, has needed a DH to give him every day at bats without the risk of running him out there in the outfield or at first base. And he's been a guy that's gotten hurt a lot. So Garrett Cooper is intriguing. I don't know if I could say he's going to be better than Ozuna, but if I had to pick one going into this season, personally, I would take Cooper. This leads me to the Mets, and I think the Mets have a better DH situation than both the Braves and the Marlins, and that is because I'm that high on Dominic Smith and what he has done, not only in spring, but if we throw out 2020, what he did in 2019 and 2020, I think he could be closer to that guy than the guy he was last year, who was playing through just a ton of injuries. If you look at his seasons in 2019 and 2020, he combined to hit 299 or 366 on base, 571 slugging, 21 home runs during that span, 31 doubles, 67 RBIs, a 150 WRC plus, and this was in 396 plate appearances. I think he can be that guy, and that's a guy that could be extremely valuable for the Mets. Also, you have Robison Cano that'll factor in, and I mentioned this before, but in his worst season, Robinson Cano with the Mets in 2019 at 256, 307 on base, 428 slugging, a 94 WRC plus. He was below average, but he had 41 extra base hits, 28 doubles in 2019. Would have led the Mets last season. You throw in his 13 home runs, that's 41 extra base hits. That would have been second on the Mets last year. I bring this up a lot just because it is a mind-boggling stat. It shows you how bad the Mets were offensively last season, but it also shows to anyone out there that just thinks Cano is a wasted roster spot that he can still bring some value to this team. I think if the Mets are where you want them to be by the end of the season, he will just be a bat off the bench and other guys will have assumed the DH role. But if he is your DH, you could do worse than Robinson Cano, and I think he's going to be better than he was in 2019. He had a really good year in 2020. I still think the swing is there enough that he's going to give you some quality at bats. You also have J.D. Davis that factors in, 285 hitter last year, 384 on base, 436 slugging, a 130 WRC plus. He too was playing through injuries, and that sapped him of his power a little bit. I could see more out of J.D. Davis. The Mets also have Mark Vientos, who I think is the highest ceiling option in the bunch. That could just be a huge contributor if he got the opportunity because the Mets are such a veteran-laden team. He likely doesn't get that real shot to assume that role this season, but I think if he did, he would thrive in it. And when I just look at all of the different options the Mets have here, I think they had the third best situation going into the year. And I could see them really surprising and outperforming a lot of these teams when it comes to their designated hitter position. Anyway, that's going to be all for this special YouTube exclusive edition of Locked On Mets. We are running out of time before opening day, so I did not have the space on the normal show that goes Monday through Friday to rank DHs. So I wanted to do that here for Wednesday's show. We are going to just talk straight Mets and Braves, the two teams atop this division. Which one is the favorite going into the year? I'll go through what we haven't discussed yet. Who has the better bullpen? Who has the better overall depth, and look at their benches? And I already talked about outfield, infield, and starting rotation, but we'll go through that as well. How do these two teams stack up on paper going into this season? Then on Thursday, we have opening day. I have a bunch of really fun opening day content for you. One of the things that we're going to be doing at the end of that show is I'll once again be joined by my guy Rob Pearsall of Mets Legends. And we're going to be breaking down, we're going to be giving you our two legendary opening day lineups. We're going through all the opening days of the past and just picking out some names that'll make you laugh and names that form our Mets legendary opening day lineups. So that's going to be a fun show on Thursday. As always, thank you for watching. I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. You can find me on Twitter at Finkelstein Ryan. You can find the show at Locked On Mets. You can find some of my work as a writer and an editor over at justbaseball.com.